today, like I said, today is all about managing the renewal process. I don't have Dave to give me some fun intro and ask how I am. It is cold here in New York. I would expect it to be a little bit warmer given where we are in the season. But that said, I'm gonna kick off. Sorry, Dave's missing this. We're going to talk about managing the renewal process. So many customer success teams have really taken on the responsibilities of owning the renewals. And I feel like it is not uncommon that we've not been trained properly on how to manage that. So what we're going to talk about today is the entire process from start to finish and everything in between to just manage that as efficiently and thoroughly as possible. I'm going to introduce to you guys our 10-step. Yes, it's 10 steps, which seems laborious, but I promise you it's there for a reason. Our 10-step process here at ClientSuccess and how we manage our renewals. And we'll talk about all the different great frameworks that you can use to just make sure that your team is getting access to the right information at the right time to forecast and manage effectively. So without further ado, we're going to jump right in. So this might not come as a shock to all of you, but some of you maybe. The renewal starts the day the contract is signed, right? This is something we need to be thinking about. So many people I talk to, they really kind of put it in the back of their mind. They're not thinking about the renewal until 90 days, maybe 120 days out from that renewal date. And that's just completely wrong, right? Your customers are assessing the value, the engagement of the partnership, that experience from that first day, right? And so if you're not cognizant of that and everything that happens from that first day on, you're not really taking control of that renewal. You're leaving it to fate. And that's something we want to be very cognizant of. Everything that you do and everything you design in your customer's life cycle is going to impact their desire to move forward and continue with the partnership. So these are things that you have to consider. So if you're looking at your customer life cycle and saying, hey, well, we talk to our customers 3 times a year and then we reach out for the renewal and they're fine and it's great, it's probably not. It's probably a good opportunity for you to double click into that and just reassess and just make sure, is this the right life cycle for our customers, right? Have we designed the right engagement model? Have we designed the best infrastructure to help ensure that they're getting value from this? Because if you're not addressing that from day one, you're going to miss a lot of time that you could have controlled that outcome. Now, sadly, I see people do this all the time, right? They implement SWAT teams and save teams and risk teams, competitive overlays, right? They do all this work where they throw all these resources at the customer in that renewal window because they failed to actually just manage everything right from day one. So if we can get better about managing the entire life cycle and be stronger about how we're managing our customers' ability to drive value from the partnership, we're going to be in a much better place. This renewal will be a non-event. It will literally just be signing the dotted line, executing and moving on. And that's what we want it to be. So a few other things, right? Perceived value and positive experience. These are going to be the 2 things that will drive and determine your customer's decision, right, to move forward. If your customers are not receiving value from the platform, from your product, from your services, from the partnership, they're not going to continue. It's as simple as that. Now, there's varying degrees of value, right? This is why we have renewal conversations, and some of those are harder than others because maybe they're not getting all the value that they wanted. Maybe they're getting a little, but we've got to work on making that better and realigning and doing some more work with them. Maybe the product's not doing what they need it to do, right? There's a whole multitude of reasons that could be unpacked in that value outcome. And then they're assessing the experience. Now, what I will say is that a customer can have a good, consistent experience, not a great experience, a good, consistent experience. And as long as they are still receiving value, they'll continue. I've even seen some instances where customers maybe had a mediocre experience or an inconsistent experience, but the perceived value was there and they continued. It's unlikely that if the perceived value isn't there, that they're going to continue. So you really have to be mindful of this. The value is everything. This is also why I've put a lot of emphasis in talking about this. And I think we did a session last bootcamp series on goals. And I'm telling you, goals are your new health score. If you are not tracking and paying attention to and achieving your customers' goals with them, paying attention to your internal metrics around a health score is wrong. Right? You're wasting your time. So focus on what it is that your customers need to see from the partnership and make sure that that is the outcome that you're driving towards. That will help ensure that long-term success. So let's get into a couple fun things here. So I talked about this, the renewal in the customer lifecycle. It doesn't just start in that 90 or 120-day window. And again, I've seen so many people have varying degrees of timelines of when they start this. If you are selling to SMB and it's very transactional, or it's a PLG motion for the most part, maybe you only need 30 days, right? Maybe you can execute paperwork really quickly. Maybe the price point is low enough, it just kind of flies under the radar. I don't know. But for most companies, I will say it's minimally 90 days to run that process. But thinking about the renewal and managing it in that window exclusively is the wrong way to go about it. So some of you may have seen my customer lifecycle. This is our version of it. We've got 4 stages: align, execute, realize, and advocate. Those are the 4 stages in the client success lifecycle. We did a whole series on customer journey mapping and how to build that, how I built this one here. But I want to map out where the renewal sits in all of these stages, because I will tell you, we are focused on the renewal from day one. So the first stage, right, align, where this is all about that partnership alignment. It's where we do our partnership kickoff. We start here setting expectations. So we set expectations not only with our customers around what it is that they want to achieve and what success looks like to them. And we ask these very pointed questions, right? How are you defining success with a partnership? What will you need to see a year from now or 2 years from now to determine your, to continue the partnership? So we're aligning with them on their aspect of it, but we're also setting expectations with them around what our process looks like. So in that alignment, we talk about this, right? We introduce our customer lifecycle. We're not shy. We say, our goal is to get to this last stage of advocacy, and we want it to be mutually beneficial. We want you to have realized the value, right? You got what you needed from our solution, but also that you're continuing with us, right? That is the benefit to us as a company. And so if we're doing all these things, right, that is our, that's what we would expect, right? You've got everything you needed, you're going to continue with us. So we talk to them about where we start that process, how we manage it. We're going to start it at 120 days out. At that point, we'll reach out to understand your intention to continue the partnership. We'll then walk through our process of collecting all the important information about what that will look like to move forward. And we're going to get through all the details there, but we align on all of that up front. So we're not shy about it. We think that it's really important to just set expectations. So this way, when we are reaching out at 120 days out, it's not a surprise to anybody, right? Everyone is anticipating or has expected that this will be the process we'll follow. So set expectations early on around what that will look like. The next thing that we do is we make sure that in our second stage of execute, which is heavily focused on product configuration, adoption, end user training and enablement, as well as that onboarding, we make sure that everything we've done there has set up our customers to succeed in achieving the goals that they set out to. Now, when we get to our session, our bootcamp session next week, the cool thing about that one is this flexible onboarding program we built allows our customers to actually design their own onboarding experience with us, right? So we tell them, great, here's your goals. Here's how we believe that you should be onboarded based on what it is that you're trying to achieve. And we let them lean into that. So we make sure that in that second stage, we've set them up so they can independently use our solution to achieve those goals moving forward. So this part is key, right? Because this will help ensure our success when we do get to that last stage of advocacy. In that third stage, that realize stage, we're always making sure we're double clicking into that. So we'll ask that question, and some of you might be familiar with this practice, but asking them, if your renewal was up today, would you continue the partnership with, in this case, ClientSuccess? And we have no problem asking very clear, direct questions to understand where our customers' heads are at, right? How are they feeling? If it's not a resounding yes, if you ask me, anything other than a resounding yes is a no. And so we want to unpack that and figure out what's going on. We don't want to avoid the question because we're scared of the answer and then get to the renewal process, hear that they're unhappy, and then swarm them. And that's the standard practice for so many companies. And I still can't really wrap my head around why we would rather do that than just manage this more effectively from the beginning. So that third stage, we make sure that we're getting a handle on how our customers are feeling about the partnership early and often. It's part of our ongoing conversation. So it's not one time, it's not one question, it's not a survey that we send out. It's part of our ongoing dialogue about how our customers are feeling about us, about the solution, about our team's ability to support them and their ability to realize their goals. Now that last stage, advocacy, this is where we run the process. Now I mentioned, right, we're going to run this 120 days out. That means 4 months before that renewal date, we're starting the outreach. We're starting our 10-step process, which will help us make sure that we're getting access to all the information, all the insights to effectively drive the outcome that we both hope for. So this is something you have to be cognizant of, right? Making sure that your renewal has a place throughout all your entire life cycle. Please do not leave it to your final stage. Do not have a stage that's called renewal where that's all you're focusing on at the very, very end. This should be part of your understanding of the partnership in perpetuity, right? Again, this infinity symbol never ends, right? Because hopefully your customer does renew, you're going back to how do we align for the next year, right? And then execute, realize, and advocate again. So this should just keep going on and on. And it should be because you've made this a part of that and a core focus for your team who's supporting your customers. So let's talk through a few things to consider. The first thing is the timeline. Now, I've mentioned this now a couple of times, right? We at ClientSuccess, I have my team running this at 120 days out. That is simply because I want to have enough time that if there is any concern or objections that we have to manage or navigate, we've got ample time to do that. I also want us to be able to forecast risk so we can manage and really kind of manage the revenue, right? And be able to forecast that out. And that's part of every, all the work that we should be doing. Our ability to forecast effectively has an impact on the business. So that timeline is critical for us. Now, if you're working with large enterprise customers, so I used to work with GE, I've worked with other really large entities, and I will tell you, we started those renewal process like 6-8 months out sometimes, depending. Now, these were multi-year contracts, but we had to start them so far in advance because of what their internal processes looked like, whether that was their decision-making process, procurement, legal. We had to go through a lot in order to get these deals executed. So you also need to consider your customers and who they are and what their processes look like. If you're selling exclusively to large enterprise organizations, you might want to consider starting that process a little bit earlier than if you're selling to SMB, right? If you're selling to SMB, it's possible that you might be dealing with a CEO and he's just going to sign and you get him paperwork and it literally could be done in a day. That's not the case, right? So you really have to assess who are your customers and what does a typical process look like for those. And listen, it might be different, right? You might have different segments of customers. You might have some of your customers where they are enterprise customers. You might have some mid-market. You might have some SMB. Jessica, your SMB is small, mid-sized business. So your small businesses. So depending on who your customer cohorts are, you might want to have a different timeline for each of those, right? You don't need to have a one-size-fits-all model for all your customers around this either. So really think about what that looks like and design it specifically for your customer base. The next thing is to figure out who the owner is. Now, we're talking about this as if the CSM is owning it, because that's where the CSMs in our company, we own the renewal process, but that's not always the case. For some of you, you might be working with an account management team. Depending on the complexity of this, it could be that you have new business or new sales running it. It really does depend. And there's no one size fits all model. There's not one way that looks or feels better for your customers. It's just really important to figure out who is the best person to own the renewal process and clearly define that and scope the roles and responsibilities along with how they're going to work with the rest of the team around that process. I will tell you, in some organizations I've been at, we had an account management team. We kind of worked in that pod model. So each of our CSMs, you had like a CSM, you had an account manager, you had a TAM, you had a leader over the pod, right? So we had this really cool structure that worked well for the customers that were in that pod. And everyone had a very clear role, right? And what they did and how they managed it. Clarity was so important, not only clarity internally on how we were going to run that with roles and responsibilities, but also for our customers to understand who was playing what role, right? How should they engage with each of these individuals? So it's really important for you to clearly identify who the owner is and make sure that it's the best person to manage that process given your business. The next thing is you've got to map out your process. There has to be a defined process. Your process doesn't need to be 10 steps. It could be 2 steps. It doesn't matter, but it's got to be your process to execute all the different steps that you'll need to in order to get this across the finish line. Now, your process should take into consideration your customers and their process, as well as your internal processes. So these are things you're going to have to navigate and kind of map together because both will be critical. So you've got to design it. Make sure that you've got all of those necessary steps mapped out clearly, and then make sure that you're also communicating, training, enabling right? So you need to make sure that your team also understands this process and how to manage to it. The last thing I'd add here is under things to consider is automation. Now, I'm not saying go ahead and automate the entire renewal process, although I'm not against that either. But what I am saying is that there's probably some elements of this that can be automated, right? Whether it's maybe the initial email, maybe there's a survey, maybe there's some other, information gathering or some push of data or insights that you're sharing out, whatever the case may be. If there are things you can introduce automation around, I'd highly recommend it. If you can do it and you can do it well, if you've got the right tech stack to do that and manage it, just because it's going to drive more efficiency in your process and hopefully save people a little bit more time. So I always like to think about it. I always have my automation hat on and try to figure out, okay, if this step do I have to have a person on it? Can I automate it, right? Do I have the right tools and technology to do so? So just something to consider, because I always want to be as efficient as possible. So as you're building out your process, these are 4 things I would consider: your timeline, who owns it, defining what your process looks like, and then figuring out, can we automate any part of that? All right, so I want to introduce you to the process that we run here at ClientSuccess. I know 10 steps, you're probably thinking like, this lady's crazy, why has she got so many steps here? But hopefully when I introduce this against the timeline that we're working from, it'll make a little sense. So we basically, like I said, we start this 4 months out, 120 days. So I would say 121 days, we encourage, maybe it's like 21, 22 days, we encourage our team to start their research. And so what this means is make sure that you've gone in, you're looking at all the data for your customers, you've reviewed their contract, you understand any custom terms there, right? Do they have any out clauses? Do they have an auto renewal? Do they have, do they have a lock on pricing? Do they have an increase in pricing that's built in? Did they have anything else specified in there that is unique to them? Also, go research your customer, right? Any exciting news, good, bad, or otherwise, any acquisitions, new funding, new leadership, anyone change? How's the data, right? Are they using the product? Are they making good use of it? Have they been engaged with you? Now, if you've got a high engagement model, your team probably just knows this stuff off the top of their head. If you've got kind of a mid or lower engagement model, it's stuff you might have to invest the time to go and just research. Either way, you want to go into this process with all the information about the commercials, information about your customer. So make sure that you're investing that time, because you want to have an appropriate conversation with your customer. Not knowing these details will impact that. So we start everything with know the information. So go do your research. The second thing we do is we do by default have an auto renewal clause in our contract. That is not uncommon in SaaS. I'm sure many of you who are here have an auto renew. How we use it, we'll talk about that. But we want to make sure that if we do, we are communicating to our customers about that early and often, right? So we want to make sure our first communication to our customers is, Mr. or Mrs. Customer, you've got a renewal coming up with ClientSuccess. Here's what that looks like. Please note, you also do have an auto renew clause in your contract, which stipulates that you have to let us know 30 days in advance your intention to not continue. That's got to be communicated in writing. Here's the dates, right? So we make sure that we specify everything. We give them all their dates, all their pricing, auto renew dates, when they need to let us know by, all this in writing, right? What mechanism. We don't want to trap our customers. We want them to make an informed decision. Now, the auto renew is great if our customers are like, oh yeah, just let it auto renew. Like, we don't have to go through the process. It allows us to just book the deal and we're done. That's great. But that's how it should be used. It should not be used as a mechanism to trap your customers into a contract because, oops, they missed the date, right? They weren't paying that close attention to it. They didn't have, a vendor management team who's paying attention to all these details. It's really poor form, and we'll get into why. But if they do have an auto renew, our team, we make sure we manage all the communication around that. We don't want anyone surprised. Those are not good surprises. The third thing is we want to make sure that we're having a meeting with our customer. While a lot of this can be started via email to introduce the details of this and get this going, we want to make sure that we're having a conversation with our customer. We want to talk through the details about this, and we're going to get into stage 4 and why. But number 3 is lock down that meeting. Now, the number one question we ask when we engage with our customer around the renewal, the number one question is it your intention to renew your subscription with ClientSuccess? Now, I didn't say, are you going to, or not, is it your intention to do so? And if it's not a yes, it's a no, right? When we start to hear things like, oh, well, we've got this new leader and we got to go figure out our budget. And yeah, we're going to double check and make sure that our team is getting everything that they need. That's fine. But now we've got to go navigate all these objections, which brings us to step 5. But we need to know your intention. Are you planning to move forward or not? This helps us just have a very direct understanding, a very clear and direct understanding of what our customer is planning to do here. And then we can adjust accordingly. We want to make sure that we're managing it effectively. And we can't if we don't know how they feel. Now, I mean, there's other questions or other ways that you might want to ask that, and that's fine. I found that other questions, or when I try to say things too nice or too politely, sometimes it allows them to avoid having a difficult conversation. So I always just like to be direct about it. Like, do you intend to renew? And then once they tell me yes or no, we navigate a whole nother series of questions and conversation. And so that leads us to step 4 here, which is MEDDPICC. Now, there are tons of sales methodologies and processes that you may have been introduced to. I think an old one and very easy one was like BANT, right? So where you're kind of doing budget, authority, I forget what N stood for, and then like timeline or whatever it was. So there's different ones. MEDDPICC for us, and I'll introduce you what that is. Thank you, Michelle. We're going to get into MEDDPICC and we'll talk through what this acronym means, but this is the process that we work with our customers to make sure that we're managing it effectively. And then we go into step 5, right? So our customers, again, if it's not a resounding yes, we absolutely are thrilled, we're moving forward, there's some objection, whether or not it's going to impact the renewal or not, we don't care. We want to make sure that our customers are feeling heard and that we're addressing any concerns they have. So any objections that they have or reservations even about moving forward, these are things we want to make sure that we're clear on. We understand the impact to our customers. We want to know, is it prohibitive? Is this going to impact their retention, the partnership long-term? And so we want to make sure that we're having conversations about that. We're mapping it out and then have a plan. So our first 5 steps get us to this point, and then we move on to our last 5, which is hopefully we've navigated those objections and any reservations they have. We have a good understanding of those. We can then move to our proposal, which is us sharing with our customer based off of what you need, what you've communicated to us. Here's what this will look like. Allow them to have an internal conversation where they're processing this or making sure they're getting financial sign off, right? Everyone's okay with the cost. Everyone's okay with the terms. They can go and review this as they need to, and then come back to us once they've confirmed it looks good. Maybe there's some iteration here. We go a little bit back and forth. That's fine. They want to negotiate pricing. That's very common. So we use that proposal step to kind of have that back and forth just to get everyone into a place where they feel good about what they're moving forward with, making sure it also addresses all their needs. The next thing we have here is next steps. I will tell you, we make sure that the team always has clear next steps. We think it's super important to make sure that we understand what our team is doing and how they're doing it. And this means, like, if we had a conversation with our customer, we're booking that next meeting, or there's a next ask, or there's an activity that we're working on, but we want to make sure that we are working on specific next steps with them always. So anytime we're doing anything, there should be a very clear next step that helps advance the process for us. Now, assuming we've gotten through all of that, they've got their paperwork, everything's been executed and closed out, we then move to closing out the op, which we manage this in our in ClientSuccess. Some people might be using their CRM. So it could be, booking it out in Salesforce. It could be maybe you're using HubSpot or another CRM. Like I said, for us, it's ClientSuccess. We make sure that we're closing out that renewal, booking it so we can process that, we can invoice them. And then we move on to, obviously, we have a thank you process and then a realignment stage. So a lot of people will get that paper signed and then move on to the next thing, whether it's with that customer or another customer, right? They're on to the next thing. And I will tell you, that's a really poor experience for your customers, where they feel like, okay, well, for weeks and weeks and weeks, you were all over me. Now that you got what you wanted, which was that signed paperwork, now you're gone. That's exactly what that experience feels like for folks. So we make sure we've extended our process to have this realignment meeting, which is basically an opportunity for us to obviously express our gratitude again in a formal meeting, but then to also say, now that you've decided to continue with us, we're moving forward, what does this success plan look like for our next term? Right? What do you need to see from us? How do you intend to use the software? What are your plans? Honestly, from their perspective, what is their journey looking like in their organization? And then what role do they see or envision us playing? So it's a very strategic conversation in that sense, but also make sure that our customers feel that they've made the right decision to move forward and that we are partnering with them on this continued journey. This isn't a matter of us getting that signed paperwork and we're on to the next thing. Now, the cool thing about this entire 10-step process is that we do automate the process, the playbook in ClientSuccess as well. So we use our success cycles to power this. So my team doesn't need to look at this slide. They don't need to set up or just remember all of these steps. Basically, what will happen is at the 123 day where we want to kick off that research stage, it triggers a playbook for the team via our success cycles and walks them through all of this. Now, it's 10 stages in our process, and then there's a ton of like little things, tasks and activities that they do that kind of power each of these stages. So it's very detailed. It's probably one of our most comprehensive playbooks just because there are so many things that you need to do and need to be accountable for when you're managing a renewal cycle. All right, now I know that I talked about MEDDPICC and how we use this, so I do want to just make sure that I'm introducing this at least at a high level. I won't spend too much time here because I will watch the clock, but there's 8 pieces to MEDDPICC, and there's different versions of MEDDPICC. I've seen it with like 1D, 2 Ps, 1C, there's MEDDPICC. I mean, so again, find an acronym that works for you that ensures your team is getting the information that they need. It doesn't need to be one of the ones that's pre-described. It could be something that's very unique and specific to your organization and the needs of your customers. But we use MEDDPICC. This is something that I've used at several organizations now. It works for the process that I orchestrate here. And so this is what we've stuck with. So the M stands for metrics. It's making sure that you have a clear understanding of the metrics that your customers are measuring to determine their success. Now, I will tell you, it's probably the hardest thing for most people to get to, and this is why we tackled goals in our bootcamp season last season. So in January, we talked about goals and goal tracking and getting to that. Understanding those metrics. Your customers are not going to have this readily available. It's not always going to be super easy for them to articulate, but you've got to have an understanding of how they're measuring success, right? Because this is going to be critical in helping you articulate the value that you brought to the partnership to ultimately ensure that commercial motion. So in this case, metrics is key for us. The next one here is economic buyer. We need to know who ultimately is the decision maker, who is funding this project, who is funding this partnership, and what role they play. So we need to know who they are, what their role is in the organization, what role they're going to play in the process. So any information that we can gather about who they are and how we should be working with them is part of that step. Now that's critical for us. The next one is around decision criteria. So what is the criteria that they're using internally to determine whether or not they're going to continue the partnership? Now, this also works, a lot of new business, new sales teams use this as well. It's definitely applicable. In fact, probably more applicable for new sales. We definitely finesse it a little bit to make it work for renewals, but it does. So we make sure that we understand their decision criteria. So ultimately, if you've got a group of people that are working collaboratively internally to decide whether or not they're going to continue or not, what is the criteria that they're measuring? What are they assessing you against? The next I want to know is, what does that decision process look like, right? What are the conversations they're having? What is the evaluation they're doing? What period of time is that happening over? Who's involved in that? So I want to understand that entire decision-making process and what that looks like. Now, those are the first 4 steps. Then you get into a paper process. That is different than the decision process, right? Your decision process is ultimately going to lead you to, yes, we're going to move forward, or no, we're not going to move forward. If they are going to move forward, we have to understand what is the paper path in that organization, right? Who are we going to send it to? How many hands touch it, right? Who's got to look at it? Does it have to go to legal? Does it have to go to procurement? Does somebody need to redline it? Does it need to come back to us? Who are the signers? Who are the CCs? Do we need multiple signers? What is the timeline of signature? So basically that entire life cycle of the contract in their organization, ultimately until we get to that executed paper. So what does that paper process look like is important, right? I can't tell you how many times I've managed a team where I've got a CSM where they're like, oh yeah, we sent them the contract 3 weeks ago. Oh, okay, well, where is that contract? What's happening to it? Who's looking at it? When can we expect it, right? And any question I ask from that point on, it's like deer in headlights, because they didn't go as far as to understand what that paper process looked like in that organization. It's critical, right? It's the difference of, you know what, you've got one person with another set of eyeballs looking at this thing, all of a sudden they veto it. You may have gotten across all of the details here. We understood the decision criteria. We got a big yes on the process. And then all of a sudden something happened in the paper process that vetoed this. You have to understand it. Ask for a timeline. Lock it down, right? My favorite thing here, great, paper process. Who's going to be looking at it? Are those people taking any time off? Are they going to be on vacation? Do they have backup? Is this going to be on someone's desk and they're like on maternity leave? All of those things have happened. So you really have to ask a lot of questions about it. Don't just allow them to tell you, lean in and ask for clarity. Identify the pain. Obviously, we want to make sure that we're solving problems for our customers with our technology, with our services. And so identifying the pain here really makes it easy for us as we're honing in on the value that we bring to the partnership, just to emphasize why they would want to continue the relationship, right? Being able to say, here's what we have helped solved for you previously, and now here's how we're going to continue to do that, or here's what that evolution will look like, but really being able to lock in on that. Understanding your champion. I will tell you, again, something that misconstrued often, your champion is not your POC, but your POC can be your champion. Allow me to explain. I always like the visual of, if you have a champion, this is the person who is selling the partnership and your product behind closed doors. When you're not in the room, they're the ones saying, I cannot live, I cannot operate, my team cannot run without this solution in place. That is your champion. It's the person who is fighting and advocating for you on your behalf, whether you are there or not. Just because you work with somebody every day doesn't mean that they are your champion. They could be a supporter, but they might not be your champion. Having a champion is key, because there are a ton of meetings that you will not be privy to. You will not be invited to. You won't even know that they're happening. And if you don't have somebody who's there saying, I need this solution, it makes my life better, it makes my team better, it drives impact for our business, you guys are at risk. And the last thing I'll say here is competition. This is big for me. I can only tell you, I've only worked in very competitive markets. And so understanding if our teams, if our customers' teams are evaluating any of their solutions, if there is competitive risk or threat, obviously there's a lot of things to consider when it comes to competitors in that process. I always say, like, listen, I want everyone to feel like they're getting the best solution for them. I think it's smart for everybody to always constantly go back and make sure that they've got best in class for them and their needs. So I think evaluations are healthy. We need to make sure that we understand if those are being conducted, because we need to make sure that we have fair play, right? Like, we want to make sure that we're getting a fair attempt to continue to earn the right to partner with our customers. So making sure that you understand that competitive landscape. I did work in a market for a period of time where our competitors, they were a little sneaky. They would have our customers sign NDAs and give them like 50% off the deal to not tell us that they were evaluating them. I mean, like, crazy things happen. So you gotta ask good questions. You gotta pay attention to cues. I'll tell you, like, every solution has specific nomenclatures or language they use in their product. If your customers using those words, maybe pay attention to that. It could be that they've been looking at another solution. So ask if they are evaluating anything else. It's okay to ask. It's okay if they are, right? This is okay. These are all part of the process, but the more you know about that, the better you can handle and navigate it. So we make sure that we are dialed into all this stuff, because it helps ensure that we're managing the process effectively. Again, for not all of your customers are going to have a wealth of information around this. Some of them, your economic buyer is also your champion. The paper process could be one person gets it and signs it, but you need to understand it, right? So regardless if these have a lot of detail or not to get to that end goal, regardless, you need to be clear on what this looks like. So big or small company, doesn't matter. Ask the questions and understand so you can manage effectively. All right, few things to navigate. These are things that I think are important to discuss as part of how your internal teams navigate the relationship around the renewal, who's managing it, who's running it. The first thing is an early renewal. I've seen teams run early renewals or early bookings very different. For us, if we get an early renewal, the dates stay the same. We're just processing the paperwork early. When their renewal date comes, they will have renewed and they move on. But we love early renewals just to get them done and dusted, right? If you've got a customer who's super happy and ready to just execute, signature, sign off on something, let them. We always make that an option for our customers if they want to execute their renewal early. Sometimes we might incentivize that if it makes sense. So if we see, based on what they're buying, maybe we want to give them an extra license in exchange for that, or maybe there's some other pricing concession or something cool you can do. Think about the value to just having that done, because it allows you to book that revenue, whether you're recognizing the revenue now or not. Regardless, it allows your team to focus on some of the renewals that might be a little bit more challenging. So it kind of takes us off their plate. But tons to think about there, depending on how your organization thinks about renewals and early renewals. But I think that they're worth something tackling and taking down if possible. The next is ARR growth. Now this, I don't necessarily mean upsell. I don't necessarily mean expansions. This might be that you guys have percentage increases built into your contracts, right? Where every year we increase automatically 3%, 5%. That's standard. A lot of contracts have that built in. Some customers negotiate that. They either negotiate the rate or they negotiate it out, whatever you guys have built in. But it's important that if your customer's price is changing, you allow time to navigate that conversation. For some people, they'll remember, oh yeah, when I signed that, I do remember there was a 3% increase clause on that. For other folks, maybe if your customer is they're not seeing the value that they would have anticipated within the period of time that they did, asking them to pay more doesn't feel right, right? So how you navigate that, I think, is important. So again, just food for you to think about, right? Things to think about, things to navigate. If there is growth there, is now the best time to enforce that? Is this a negotiable thing for you? Does this help prevent downsell? So in this case, if you've got 3% built in, your customer's not super thrilled, maybe you negotiate against yourself and say, you know what, instead of 3%, we'll lock you in for 1% this year. We'll go back to 3% next year when we make sure that we're doing 1, 2, 3, 4. So again, it depends, and every company is a little different. So make sure that you understand what flexibility you have to work with those things. But again, if there is an increase there, you make sure that you are having clear conversations with your customers, helping them understand why, the value that they're getting, right? Most of us are working in SaaS environments where we're constantly innovating and building out new products, new updates, things that make their lives better, make their use of the product a little bit better. That's where this is going to, right? It's that constant innovation. So the price doesn't stay the same because they're actually getting something completely different, right? Imagine if your customer was paying the same thing 10 years from now, what your product would look like in 10 years, right? It seems crazy. So this is to help support all of the updates, all the new features, all the new innovation. So make sure that you're having the appropriate conversation, but you're navigating it well. The next thing here, downsell. Nobody likes to talk about this, but it does happen if your customers aren't thrilled. I think anyone would rather take some contraction to the contract as opposed to churning a customer in its entirety. So something to consider is understanding what flexibility, what room you have, what are your floors and ceilings there on your downsell. But if you can keep a customer, at what cost, right? What does that look like in your business? And making sure that you understand how to navigate that, your internal processes around approvals, right? Again, what are those floors and ceilings? What flexibility do you have without approval? What do you need to get sign off on? When does it no longer make sense to the business to keep a customer if the contraction is kind of moving in a direction that doesn't make sense? So again, something for you guys to think about. And the last thing here is the value of a multi-year contract. I don't know anybody who doesn't love a multi-year. I love multi-year contracts. I wish I had many. I used to work for a company where all of our contracts were 3 years long. It kind of took all the renewals fun out of my job because I actually do enjoy this stuff. But the multi-years were really interesting. It does really help secure that revenue for the business. They're great for a multitude of reasons. So I like to introduce these as a value add to our customers. Maybe we're making some partnership agreement there in exchange for multi-years. So making sure that it's a perceived value for them. Obviously, it's a perceived value for us as well. So I think it's really key if you can introduce this to have those conversations as well. So again, this is where the timeline comes into play of how long you're giving yourself to run all of this, because all these things are on the table for discussion, right? It's very rare that you'll have a renewal conversation that's, oh, your renewal's up, great, let me sign, and it's done in one day. That's an anomaly. So all of these things should be part of your dialogue, right? Early renewals, growth, contraction, if you need to go that route, multi-year contracts, right? So just navigating this effectively is really important. Now, you know me, I love to end in a slide that gives you some key takeaways. So I'm going to give you like my mistakes. Don't do these things when it comes to your renewals. First thing I'm going to say is don't lock your customers into an auto renewal without proper communication. This is my least favorite thing. I've worked in companies, maybe full transparency, where like that was their go-to. In fact, like all of our contracts had auto renewals. We didn't talk to customers like the week that their auto renew was kicking in. I mean, it was like that there was like a big focus on that. It was like, oh yeah, then friendly reminder after your auto renew has passed. It was like, hey, by the way, your contract auto renewed. Let's make sure that you have everything that you need to move forward with. That just felt really icky, right? Now imagine you're a customer. I'm sure you guys have had customers. Maybe you've navigated this situation. It just doesn't feel good. It's not how you want to keep the business. And I'm telling you, ultimately, that will do a huge disservice to you and your company and your brand anyway, if that is your motion. So please try not to lock your customers in, just manage the communications around it. Again, if you're doing your job, you wouldn't even need that as your strategy. Your customers should just be wanting to continue the partnership. The second, don't start the renewal too early or too late. Find out the timeline that is just right for you and your customers. I've worked some places where like they weren't even thinking about the renewals until probably like 45 days out. And I'm like, how are you at a renewal process in 45 days? Like I'm like full panic sweat. Other companies, again, wanting to start it too early because most of their customers were enterprise, but then you had a whole tranche of customers that weren't, where that motion of like 6 or 8 months out didn't make sense, right? So be cognizant of it. It's not a one size fits all model. You can have multiple renewal models or processes for different customer segments. So not one size fits all. Make sure the timing is right. Not having the right conversation with the right people. Again, I'm sure a lot of you have been part of a conversation where like you've spoken with your champion and you're like, yeah, we're absolutely renewing. We love you. We couldn't live without you. And then all of a sudden you find out they're not renewing. And it's because some executive that you didn't have a conversation with, who you didn't even know was part of the partnership, they vetoed it because they have a relationship with one of your competitors. This is why going back to MEDDPICC and that second bullet there was your economic buyer is so key, right? All the parts of MEDDPICC ensure that you avoid a lot of this. And that's why we've followed that process, but not having the right conversations with the right people literally will burn you every time. So you've got to make sure that you're getting buy-in from everybody that's part of this process. And you've got to know who those people are. So make sure that that's happening. The fourth one is ignoring red flags. Again, even myself over the years, I've had happy years, right? You want to believe that your customers love you, that they're seeing value, and that there's no issues, and you don't pay attention to the signs. Pay attention to any red flags, right? If your customer is not engaging with you, if they're being evasive, if they're not giving you any direct responses, if they're mentioning keywords from another competitive solution, right? Like these are red flags. These are all red flags. Pay attention to them. Do not ignore them. Dig deeper, seek clarity, ask questions. It'll just help to make sure that you're avoiding stepping into a landmine or ultimately losing your customer. And the fifth thing is forecasting without having access to all the necessary info. Please do not tell your leadership team that you're securing $1 billion in revenue this quarter and that you're confident it's all coming in. In the meantime, you haven't even started that process. Having had to navigate the conversations with leadership team about revenue, the worst thing my team can do to me is set me up with a misset forecast, right? I'd rather be not necessarily conservative, but I want to be realistic, right? So when we talk about what's our best case versus most likely or what's in committed, these are all different stages of how we think about forecasting. I want to make sure that it's accurate. It reflects reality, and that if a customer, if one of my CSMs, they win the lotto and they're not here tomorrow, the deals that they said are definitely coming in, right? And we'll work the rest. So make sure that you're forecasting with all of the appropriate information so you can manage that effectively. So listen, we can probably, I'm sure if I pooled you all, you'd probably give me 100 more mistakes that we've all made as we've navigated renewal conversations or processes with our customers. But that said, we've got 10 minutes remaining. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to hop over to the Q&A and I'll also check out the chat and see if there's any questions I've missed there. So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. I don't have Dave here to give me an organic pause, so I'm going to just take a sip of iced tea quickly. So give me a second. Okay, usually that's where Dave buys me some time. I can get some air and drink something. All right, so I'm going to pull up our Q&A here to see what questions we've got and see how many we can get to. So first one that we've got here is, how do you suggest resetting the renewal process for existing customers where you've not set a detailed expectation in advance? I mean, I think that's a great question, right? Processes change all the time. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with going back to your customers and saying, hey, we've defined a new process for X, and here's what that process looks like. We want to walk you through it and make sure that you're comfortable with it, allow you to ask any questions. I think it's just all part of, we're all evolving our processes and how we manage everything. So if you've not had the conversation already with your customer on what that will look like, it's fine to just introduce it at this point and say, great, we've created a process. Here's what this looks like. Here's the team you'll be working with. Here's how we'll run that. And if you've got any questions, let us know. So I think that that's fine. I don't think that you need to worry about that. I think once you're ready to communicate a plan, communicate your plan. Just make sure that you're doing that. But resetting on any of these changes is fine. I think your customers will anticipate that over time, things are going to change. And it's how you manage that change with them that I think makes the difference. In this case, just make sure you're communicating it. All right, next question here. What's the time frame for the realignment meeting after the renewal? Within 2 weeks or 30 days of the renewal? That's a great question, Andy. So this is a newer part of our process that we built in because I did get a feeling that like, just having done this for as many years as I have, is that it just always felt wrong, right? Like you work this customer, you're so invested, then all of a sudden it's like, they sign the contract. It's like, okay, woo, go swarm the next customer. And like, they get less. So what we've tried to do is we actually try to get this on the books within 5 days of that renewal date, 5 business days, right? So if we're planning it in advance, and this also, the cool thing about this realignment meeting post-renewal is that because we book it in advance, usually during the renewal process, if our customers are reluctant to get on the calendar, that's a red flag for us, right? Like we pay attention to that. If our customers are like, oh, absolutely, let's book it, we usually take that as like a good indication that they're going to continue the partnership, because why would they be booking this meeting in advance after the renewal date if they weren't intending to continue? So we're not saying that this is what dictates our forecasting by any means, but it's a helpful indicator for us, good or bad. So we're booking it. We try to get it 5 business days after the renewal because we don't want to lose time or traction. That's the other part of it, right? Is we want them to feel like, their renewal started today, let's say. As soon as possible, we're talking about what that success looks like. If we waited 30 days, that's 1/12 of their contract on a 12 month. So we want it to happen as soon as possible, just to make sure that they also feel the sense of urgency for us to continue to partner with them in that way. Another question that we have here is, do you have any suggestions on how to add in increase of price in the renewal if it doesn't state it in the contract? Yes, I mean, honestly, it's not as fun or easy as if it is stated in the contract, but we're negotiating this all the time. I mean, honestly, our customers, for the most part, most people do a great job negotiating when it's a new contract. And then what happens over time is that people forget to go back to it and renegotiate and raise prices, especially, over different years and teams and new leadership. So for example, here at ClientSuccess, we navigate this often. A lot of our customers are paying under list, right, which is not uncommon. But in order for us to step them back up, we just have these conversations with them where we are, again, it's a commercial conversation. It's a negotiation. We've got to bring up our contracts. We have to right size them. The rate that they were given when they came on board was a courtesy as a new customer, and it didn't state this in their contract, but this is the price that we're moving forward with. So again, this is where have the conversation early. You have got to navigate that. So I don't know that I've got like tips or tricks on how to navigate it outside of having very direct conversations once your customers express their intention to continue or not to continue. If they're telling you right off the bat, right, that we're not planning to continue, introducing increases is probably not your best strategy. If your customer tells you, yes, we're planning to renew, great. This is where when you have that customer meeting with them and you're having that dialogue with them, you can say, I do want to let you know that our prices have increased. Here's what that looks like. Want to make sure that I'm here to answer questions, right? So you can start to broker an open dialogue with that and get a sense of how they're feeling. Be careful, right? Like don't try to 10x someone's contract because you want to get more money. So be thoughtful about it. Take a look at all the details about the customer, the contract, the value, adoption. So just assess everything and make sure that it's going to feel mutually beneficial for everybody. Let's see. Oh my gosh, we got such great questions. Okay. Do you include the discount given within the contract? So if this is to say, do we specify the discount if it's in the contract? If you're just asking about how we talk about this when we're having the conversation with the customer, we do include discounts written on the contract. So it's very clear what they're paying versus list. We make sure that, again, if we can specify what future increases will look like, we do want to include that. So that way it's already built in. And we make sure that, again, if we're having those conversations with the customer, they understand that this discount was maybe specific to them coming on board as a new customer. And so we want to make sure that, again, we're just very open with everything when it comes down to pricing, right? Here's our list. Here's what you came on board with. Here's what our price is now. Here's how we're going to step you closer to that, right? So it's just, again, it's being flexible, but having an open conversation with them. I don't know if I answered that question specifically. Hopefully I did, but we do try to make sure that all discounts are specified everywhere. We also want our customers to understand like total cost of savings, all of that, right? So if they've got discounts on a bunch of different elements that make up the total contract, making sure that we're all clear on that. Everyone feels good about it. All right, more questions here. All right, we talked about that one, Andy. Let's see, how do you suggest, okay, we did this one, sorry. Okay, curious, how do you get to the decision criteria? This is one that we ask just with our customers, right? So we ask them like, what is the decision-making criteria? So what are you assessing to determine whether or not you're going to continue the partnership, right? Or select us to move forward with. For a lot of our customers, they're gonna, talk about they might talk about support. It's going to be product. Maybe product has a matrix of its own where they're looking at does it have all the features that we need? Does it align with our processes? Does it fulfill the things that we're trying to do? So usually customers will be thoughtful about that. I won't say always, and not every customer is going to map it out very detailed, but they'll have something that they're basing it off of, right? It's not just like, how do I feel today? I like them, I'm going to continue, or I'm not. Usually they're assessing something. So you've got to just ask them and you kind of push them on that errand. So just ask the question of, how are you determining whether or not you're going to move forward or not? What does that process look like? What's the decision criteria? And usually they'll give you something. And here's the things that we're looking at. Here's what we're assessing internally. Okay, let's see, we could probably get to one more question here. So do you ever change the question from do you intend to renew, given that the terms of the agreement are set to auto renew unless X days notice are given? Yeah, because we don't, like I said, we're working in this conversation well in advance of the auto renewal. So we let them know that the auto renew is there, but they can execute it out 30 days prior to. If we're starting the process at 120 and my question is, do you intend to renew? My goal is not to lock them into an auto renew clause. So we want to make sure that if they intend to renew, that's great. And we also let them know if you do change your mind or if anything changes throughout this process, this is the day you will need to provide written confirmation to us by, so that way you can execute that auto renew. If you don't, if you say you intend to renew and you do not send us written confirmation 30 days in advance, the auto renew will be enforced. So we do just make sure, again, this is where communication about all the details, not only verbally, but also in writing, is key, because you don't want to surprise your customers. So making sure that that's given to them. But we're always very specific. We don't change that question. I think their intentions are really important for us to understand. Let's see, we could probably do one more. So what are your suggestions for renewal timeline for very short project life cycles, i.e. 120 days? Again, it depends on it. Like I always say, it depends, right? It does depend, because if your customer's process takes a long time, you've got to include an account for that, even if the timeline on a project might be shorter. So for us, like I said, we run it at 120 because we feel like that gives our customers enough time to have the conversations they need to internally. It gives us enough time to manage any risk if there is any. We just don't want to be surprised. We want to be able to give enough time to manage things in its entirety and also feel like it's a good experience for everybody and not rushed. I will tell you, not uncommon, but if you look at your contracts in its totality across your entire year, if you're a leader, we've got a lot of our renewals happen in Q3, Q4, a lot in Q4, a lot around December. And so for us, starting the process early also helps us avoid things like holidays and time off. So like everything we do is very intentional to allow for life, because life happens. People are out, people have babies, people go get married, they go on honeymoons, they go on vacation, doesn't matter. You're out for a multitude of reasons. And we want to make sure that we've given ourselves enough time to manage all that effectively. So I know that we did not get to all the questions. There are a lot of great questions in here. Happy to entertain anything if you want to shoot it to me via LinkedIn, and I'm happy to have a attempt an answer or have a chat about it, but want to just thank you all very much for your time today and for joining me. We do have one more episode in this series. So next Tuesday will be our last one. We'll talk about onboarding. So hopefully you'll all be able to join us back again next Tuesday at 2 o'clock Eastern.